They actually said it. Word for word. Let him handle the $12.4 million deadline, then fire him. I was not meant to hear it. My name is Cole Mercer. I am not the loudest in the room. I never needed to be. I built a quiet reputation over 16 years for delivering on what others called impossible. No shortcuts, no theatrics, just steady execution. I was brought in to rescue high-stakes projects. This one, $12.4 million, government-backed, tech-integrated logistics overhaul, was my most ambitious yet. And the moment it was greenlit, I was already being written out. I had spent months rebuilding fractured partnerships across 3 vendors, renegotiating timelines that were impossible from the start, and stitching together a team of 27 professionals, most of whom had stopped believing in the work. They were cynical, burnt out, underpaid. I did not blame them. When I joined the company 5 years earlier, it was during a turnaround. I was one of 3 brought in under a new strategy initiative. We were not saviors. We were workhorses. And I accepted that. My role was always clear. Fix what is broken, deliver what is promised. But as the company grew, so did the egos. Somewhere along the line, the work stopped mattering as much as the credit. This project was different. It had visibility, investors, government pressure. If it failed, it would be in headlines. If it succeeded, well, that was not my concern, or so I thought. About 3 months into the project, the new CEO took over. He had a background in finance and no understanding of operations. None. And yet, within his first week, he made 2 moves. 1, he dissolved the performance oversight board I had helped set up, and 2, he shifted reporting on the project away from the program office and into his executive circle. No conversation, no warning. I did not complain, I documented. It was a Thursday when I heard it. Not from a hallway whisper, not even secondhand. I was dialing into a vendor call that was scheduled immediately after a closed-door strategy session. Apparently, someone forgot to disconnect the bridge line before we were added in. I heard my manager's voice first. Calm. Calculated. Let him carry it across the finish line. He is too far in now. Pulling him would crater the timeline. Then the CEO's response. Fine. Let him handle the $12.4 million deadline. Then fire him. Quietly. He is not aligned with the future direction. I froze. The vendor had not joined the call yet. It was just me, staring at my monitor, listening to 2 people discuss my value as if I were a piece of equipment. Use, then discard. And what struck me most was not the betrayal. It was how unsurprised I felt. See, the shift had already started months ago. Emails stopped, including me. Executive reviews were rescheduled without me. Strategy memos referencing the project had names on them that had never been in the room. Mine was not one of them. I was slowly being erased, and I knew it. But hearing it spoken out loud, confirmation, it lit something in me. Not anger, not revenge, something colder, something sharper. I did not confront anyone. Not that day, not the next. I did what I always did. I worked. But now, with the understanding that I was not preserving a career, I was closing a chapter. And if they wanted me out, I would give them exactly what they asked for. But not how they expected. The first thing I did was stop shielding them. I had spent months absorbing risk, coaching junior managers, translating executive confusion into actionable tasks, smoothing out client tension. I pulled back, not recklessly, just enough to let the cracks show. Suddenly, executives who had dismissed my updates were being asked direct questions by stakeholders, questions they could not answer. Documents were missing context. Status reports looked optimistic, but reality started leaking through. They were exposed, and they did not even realize it. Meanwhile, I focused on delivery. I knew that if the deadline slipped, I would be blamed. So I did not let it slip. I doubled my hours. I cut through red tape. I took meetings at 6 in the morning and midnight. Quietly, I closed out dependencies, verified deployments, aligned every system. By week 6, the platform was stable. Week 7, the integration passed compliance review. By week 9, we were within 4% of the budget target, an unheard-of margin for a project this size. Internally, they started to panic, not because the project was off track, but because it was not. Because I was doing exactly what they hoped, only faster, more publicly. I was being invited to client reviews. My name was showing up in reports. Directors from partner organizations were forwarding my notes to their board members. And now they had a problem. They could not fire me without explaining why. So they pivoted. One afternoon, I was called into a meeting with a senior executive from Human Resources and my direct manager. Tone was polite, framed as a discussion about career alignment. I let them talk. Eventually, they offered a transition plan. 6 weeks of phased exit, tied to completion of the project. A smooth exit. A thank you and a severance check. I asked if I could think about it. They smiled, told me I had until Friday. What they did not know was that I had already made up my mind. It was not enough for them to lose me quietly. I wanted the truth to be seen, not for spite, for the people who trusted me, my team, my clients, the ones who had every right to believe the company valued its integrity. So I prepared something else. I called a meeting with the executive sponsor from the client side, someone who had always been direct with me. I laid out the final delivery timeline, dependencies, and performance metrics. I walked them through every unresolved risk and flagged the ones that were being buried for optics. Then I told them I would be stepping down. Not after the project, before. I saw it in her face. Disappointment, concern, maybe even frustration. She asked why. I told her plainly I was being removed, that the decision had already been made, that I had stayed on only to stabilize what I could. I did not throw anyone under the bus. I did not need to. The documentation spoke for itself. 2 days later, I submitted my resignation. Immediate. And that was when the calls started. Directors who had ignored my updates were now scrambling to recover access to documents I had maintained. Managers who had dismissed my feedback were asking for summaries they had once deemed too technical. The CEO? Silent. But the client? They escalated, hard. I never expected what happened next, not fully, but when it started unfolding I was not surprised, not really. The thing about walking away is that everyone expects a scene, a meltdown, some symbolic gesture, slamming a door, forwarding emails, airing dirty laundry in a dramatic exit speech. But I did none of that. I left with silence, the kind that rattles more than shouting ever could. Within hours of submitting my resignation, I locked down every system I was authorized to oversee. Not in a malicious way, just clean exits. I transferred access to the appropriate operational leads, annotated every document, uploaded every version-controlled file into the shared archive. My email was sorted by stakeholder. I created an index. No one could say I left them in chaos. I left them naked under their own floodlight. What they never expected was the reaction from the client. The executive sponsor, her name was Dana, called an emergency alignment meeting with the company's leadership. The kind of meeting where cameras are on, and there is no small talk. She was calm, just like me, but every word was deliberate. She asked one question: why did Cole walk? and they could not answer it. Not convincingly. They stumbled through vague statements about strategic realignment and restructuring, but none of it held. Not when she had my project briefs in front of her. Not when she had seen the turnaround firsthand. Not when her internal audit team had already confirmed that my work had saved the program 7 figures. That same afternoon, I got a message. Not from my former employer, but from someone else entirely. A senior project director at one of the government agencies funding the project. He asked if I would be open to speaking. Off the record. I agreed. We met virtually. His tone was neutral, almost cautious, but he did not waste time. He told me that word had spread, about the exit, about the silence, about the timing. And he had questions. I answered only what I could without violating confidentiality. I never shared internal messages, never defamed anyone. But I did describe process failures. I explained how key risks were suppressed, how executive priorities shifted away from client needs, how certain deliverables were deprioritized in favor of speed. He listened, took notes. Then he said, "That matches what we have been hearing." Apparently, I was not the first departure, just the most visible. That was the moment I realized this was not just about me. The leadership had been staging a quiet consolidation, cutting away operational voices, promoting yes men, sanitizing bad news to impress the board. And for a while, it worked. Until my exit lit up a chain reaction. Over the next few weeks, I started receiving messages from people I had worked with, vendors, former colleagues, even interns. They shared what had changed, how quality controls were being ignored, how review cycles were cut in half, how the go-live date was being fast-tracked again without the testing protocols I had fought to implement. And then I heard the phrase that stopped me cold, "They are trying to blame you." I asked what that meant. One of my former team leads told me she had been pulled into a meeting with senior leadership, and someone had floated the idea that Cole's exit had caused destabilization, that I had left them midstream, that I had taken key knowledge with me. She pushed back, hard, reminded them of the documents, the handoffs, the audit trails, and then she forwarded me the backup, emails time-stamped, project files uploaded, access logs. Everything proving I had done it right. I felt a strange sense of calm reading it, because now they were scrambling. The project had crossed the final checkpoint I had built, an integration milestone tied to external reporting. Without me, they were relying on people who had not been involved in the original architecture, people who had not read the specs. And when things started misfiring, predictably, they were looking for a fall guy, but I was already gone, and someone else was watching. A few days after that, I received an unexpected offer. A consulting firm, not flashy, not huge, wanted to bring me on for a strategic oversight role. Not because of what had happened, but because of what I had built. Apparently, my name had come up in internal discussions about program rescue protocols. My approach had been flagged as a case study in how to stabilize chaos without drama. I took the meeting. We talked. Not about revenge, not about my old company, just work. Philosophy, integrity. And they said something that stuck with me. Anyone can deliver. But the ones who deliver with transparency, they are rare. Meanwhile, back at my former company, cracks had turned into craters. 3 major vendors pulled out of preferred agreements, citing alignment concerns. One filed a formal complaint over breach of technical terms, but the real blow came when the client escalated their concerns to the funding board. The CEO tried to spin it, said the project was progressing with adjusted leadership, claimed my exit was planned, predictable. But they had no documentation to support that story, because it was not true. I had documented every milestone, every risk, every warning, and they had ignored it. The board did not cancel the funding, but they did something worse. From a corporate ego standpoint, they installed external oversight, an audit team, independent, no ties to internal leadership. Their job? Assess operational integrity across all major programs. My name came up again. Not because I filed a complaint, but because the records led back to me. The audit team requested access to my archived documentation. I gave it, under the appropriate legal protections. And when they compared my files to the company's internal reporting, the discrepancies were obvious. The CEO was called to account. So was my former manager. And while I was not there to see it, I heard enough. Performance reviews were frozen. Bonuses were suspended. The executive narrative began to shift from visionary leadership to operational oversight under review. And all I did was tell the truth. I did not storm out. I did not burn bridges. I simply refused to stay quiet while others rewrote the story. But the irony, they did it to themselves. Had they let me go after delivery, with respect, I would have walked, grateful for the work. But they tried to use me, tried to cast me as disposable. And in doing so, they exposed exactly who they were. What followed was not revenge. It was reflection, done in public. And people noticed. I never set out to crash their house of cards. I only pulled the card they had balanced everything on, me. And when that card left the table, everything started to fall. There is a certain peace that comes when the dust settles, and you realize you no longer have to prove anything to anyone. I was not chasing vindication. I had already walked away. But what came after? It spoke for itself. The company tried to contain it. The narrative. The truth. They rebranded the situation internally, calling it a learning opportunity and growing pains. But people were not buying it. Not when senior clients were walking away and when employees were quietly reaching out to recruiters in droves. I watched from a distance, and for a while, I stayed quiet. But then one morning, I got a message from someone I had not spoken to in over a year. A former director who had taken early retirement. He had heard what happened, said, "I always knew they would eat their own." Then he added, "You did not just survive. You exposed the entire game." I will not pretend I was unaffected. There were nights I woke up wondering if I could have handled things differently, if I should have stayed and fought from within. But then I would remember the silence in those executive meetings, the kind where eyes shift and no one wants to acknowledge what they all know. That is not a place where truth lives. It is a place where blame is bartered and silence is currency. And I was done trading in silence. Meanwhile, my work was quietly being studied. Not by my old company, of course. They were too busy trying to rewrite history, but by those who still believed in results backed by principles. I was invited to contribute to a private roundtable on operational integrity and high-stakes projects. Not a flashy event, just a room full of people who knew the stakes, who had carried weight others only wrote about in memos. I spoke once, just once, shared what happened. Not names, not titles, just patterns. Afterward, someone from a major infrastructure firm asked if I would consider reviewing a failing program of theirs. They needed someone who had been through the fire and walked out holding the blueprint. I said yes. What started as a 90-day engagement turned into a new chapter, not a job, a purpose. I was not managing deliverables anymore. I was steering failing programs back to shore. Not with politics, not with ego, just facts, accountability, and clean process. I found something unexpected in that work. Clarity, the kind that only comes after you have been dismantled by the very system you upheld. I was no longer trying to impress anyone. I was building. Quietly, strategically, with people who still valued the truth over theater. And the more I built, the more I realized how rare that was. Back at my former company, things continued to unravel. I did not seek updates, but they found me. Vendors withdrawing support, key hires leaving, investors starting to ask questions. The CEO went from center stage to damage control. And the phrase I kept hearing, "They underestimated him." I did not need that validation, but I will admit, hearing it felt like closure. Because I remembered the meeting where it all began, the one where I sat just outside the glass wall while they decided my fate like I was a calendar item to be cleared. Let him handle the $12.4 million deadline, then fire him. That was their mistake. They saw my work as transactional. They thought I would give everything to the project and nothing would come back on them. But they forgot something basic. People notice. The client noticed, the teams noticed, the paper trail noticed. I never needed revenge. They did that to themselves. All I did was finish what I started and leave the truth intact. One day, I got a call from the same client executive, Dana. She had moved on, too. New company, new role, larger scope. She said, "You were the only person in that mess who never tried to sell a story. You just showed your work." She asked if I would be open to leading a turnaround at her new firm. Bigger stakes. A program that had already consumed 3 directors and 2 budget resets. I took 2 days to think about it. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to make sure my decision was not emotional. I asked questions, reviewed the plan, read the contract, then I said yes. But this time, I negotiated on my terms. No hidden chains, no silent dismissals behind glass walls. Just clarity. The first meeting I attended at that new company was completely different. There were no inflated egos, no politics masquerading as strategy. Just professionals, exhausted, honest, but still trying. I could work with that, and I did, for months, quietly. We built new systems, rewrote old assumptions. We stabilized scope, reset vendor expectations, restructured budget flows without cutting muscle. It worked. Not because I was a hero, but because I knew what failure smelled like, and I refused to let it set in. And at the end of that engagement, when the results came in and the client board approved the program's next phase without conditions, someone leaned over to me and said, "We heard what happened before. That is why we called you." It hit me then. Not all stories end with a punchline. Some end with recognition, some with a lesson. Mine ended with both. Because what they tried to bury me with, that pressure, that deadline, that dismissal, it became the reason I became undeniable. I do not tell this story to gloat. I tell it because this is what reality looks like. People will make decisions based on fear, greed, or arrogance. And sometimes you will be caught in the crossfire. But how you exit, that defines everything. They wanted me to carry their deadline, then disappear. They got the deadline. But I did not disappear. I just stopped playing by their rules. And when I did, their whole framework, built on short-term thinking and silent politics, collapsed under its own weight. I never crashed their company. I just removed myself from their illusion. The rest? Gravity handled it.